Good evening, community. I would like to share my story. I have thought a lot about whether to send it or not, since there may be those who say that it is not precisely related to something paranormal. And it's just that lately, the doubt of having lost my pet generates great intrigue in me, especially because of how it happened. The story begins when my wife and I decided to adopt a small cat when we were still dating. I have always believed that pets choose us, that we humans are merely lucky to find them. That's how it happened with my wife, or so I believe, when we met Dorothy, my cat. She was going through a very emotionally complicated time, although it was hard for me to notice. As soon as she met that cat, she knew it had to be him, especially since she had never had a pet before. At that time, I already had my other two little pets, my kitty and a puppy who had been with me for over 9 years. Although she knew them through our relationship, she never truly felt they were hers. I shared with her my belief that pets come into our lives when we need them, and without thinking, we decided to adopt him. Dorothy was a very healthy cat of a very rare and hard-to-find breed, which always highlighted his beauty. My wife and I moved from dating to a more formal relationship and decided to live together. At first, we moved into a small room, but we soon felt that the space wasn't enough for our 3 pets. I felt it wasn't enough space for them, and I made the mistake of letting myself be carried away by those thoughts. Well, in retrospect, it was a mistake because I started looking for a place that was big enough for this new family, and that ended up being the worst mistake of my life. We found a spacious apartment, although without a patio, but large enough to adapt a space for the pets. We settled in, and although my wife loved the place, it caused me a bit of insecurity. To be honest, deep down, she felt it too, but it was the ideal apartment for the lifestyle we had at that time, and in part, she felt it was something she could handle. She has beliefs regarding energies, cleansing of environments, and even a bit of sensitivity to that kind of things, and perhaps that's why she didn't fully feel it was her home. There was something strange. We decided to ignore that feeling. Time passed with relative normality, although being there at night caused me fear, or at least a noticeable discomfort. However, I was comforted to see my wife well, to see our pets moving freely without being cramped. They slept with us in the bed, and Doro used to lie on my wife's chest. As I said, they had a special connection beyond human understanding. Dorothy cared for and protected her when she was sad or sick, as if he knew she was feeling bad. One night, while my wife and I were playing and tickling each other and saying the typical, "I love you," "No, I love you more," before sleeping, something happened. Something I have no way to explain. I have no way to prepare you for this, so I'm just going to say it. Dorothy lay on my wife's chest, suddenly looked at her intently, and with complete clarity, we heard him say, "I love you." I had never heard anything so clear. I felt a chill run through my body, and my wife responded, but very scared, "I love you too, but don't say it to me again." As if not knowing what else to do, not knowing what else to say. All my life I have had pets since I was very young. My dad always taught me to respect them, understand them, and see them as part of our family. And I don't know if you've seen those viral videos on social media of kittens that, among meows, let slip a phrase like one that says, "Raoul," or "I'm drowning," videos that are cute. But this was different. This went beyond a meow. For my wife and me, it was a very strange feeling. To feel fear, but at the same time not too much because he was our cat, because we loved him. It's very difficult to explain. We didn't talk about it. We didn't mention it. We wanted to act as if it hadn't just happened. But from that night on, the vibe of the house began to feel very heavy. A kind of thing started that to this day I can't understand. Dorothy began to fear being alone. He wouldn't sleep or be calm if my wife wasn't at home. And for some strange reason, my dog spent every night in the living room, watching a point on the wall, or he would lie on the bed but looking in that direction. The environment became oppressive, and both my wife and I began to feel tired, with dark circles under our eyes. Something was not right. being honest with you, I was no longer sleeping. I could notice that because I have always been a very light sleeper, and for some strange reason, at night, I would stay awake with the cat until sleep overcame me. My wife felt that her energy was draining very easily, to the point of almost fainting, and that fatigue we weren't talking about was truly beginning to show physically. We were pale, and it was increasingly frightening to be at home. From the smallest things like getting up to go to the bathroom at night or turning off the lights produced enormous fear, and we both began to understand, to accept that something had changed, that something was different with us, with our pets, and the constant fear that Dorothy now felt was not normal either. When we weren't at home, we would find Dorothy hiding in the closet among the clothes, and my dog motionless, watching. So we decided, with much regret, to look for a new place to live. But everything seemed to put obstacles in our way. I lost my job, and the money simply wasn't enough. We couldn't move forward. I swear I worked hard to get out of there, but something always came up. One day after work, I felt the need to visit my mom. My wife accompanied me, and in fact, we spent the night there. For the first time in weeks, we were able to sleep well, to rest. But the next day, after lunch, we said goodbye and went home. I really wanted to get back to see my little animals because I had a feeling that something wasn't right. And indeed, something happened to them that night. When we got home, our dog didn't greet us barking happily as always. We found him hiding inside a piece of furniture. He was scared to death and wouldn't come out even though we were already there. We also found a strange stain on the wall. We didn't know how it had formed, but we couldn't clean it no matter how hard we tried. I was already nervous that night when some bites on my feet woke me up. I checked myself and saw many fleas. Like any person with pets, I was worried and checked my animals, but they didn't have a single one. The next day, we took them to the vet, and he saw them completely healthy. But that night, I felt bites again, and now there were even more fleas. The house was completely infested. They were everywhere. We had to leave because it was truly impossible to stay. We went to my mother-in-law's house, and I checked my pets again. They didn't have fleas, but we found something worse. They had wounds, open wounds that looked like bites. The next day, we took them back to the vet, and now he was surprised to see them like that in that condition. It seemed, according to him, that they had had a flea infestation for months, something that was completely impossible because just a day before he hadn't found a single one. For some reason, the most affected was my little dog Chillaquil. After a week, we gathered the courage to return to the apartment to empty it and hand it over. Upon entering, there was no trace of fleas, as if they had never been there. But the stain on the wall had grown. It was taking a monstrous shape, and I felt a mix of relief and anger. Anger at seeing it, but relief at no longer being there. I destroyed furniture, broke things, and threw away everything I could, without taking anything more than a bit of clothing and important documents. While we were cleaning, a huge puddle of blood formed on the floor. Very, very big, and I don't know why, but I felt it was from my dog, and I cried a lot while cleaning it. I handed over the apartment, and finally our pets recovered completely. We moved to a new house, and I decided to send my kitty and my dog to my mom's house since they had a yard to play in there. Something told me it was the best, that they needed it, and Dorothy stayed with us since he was very home-loving. The first month in the new house was peaceful, but then Dorothy began to lose weight, to behave strangely. Every dawn, exactly at 4 a.m., he would wake up, meow, and hide in the closet. This lasted a month in which the little cat didn't seem to improve no matter how hard we tried, no matter how many times the vet checked him without finding anything. One morning, my wife, before leaving for work while Dorothy was following her to the door as always, turned and said to him upon saying goodbye the following: "If you have to go, I will understand. You can go, baby, without worries." That afternoon, Dorothy ran out of the house suddenly, and I couldn't catch up to him. That was the last time we saw him. Since then, the bad vibe disappeared. All the bad things, everything we felt, went away suddenly, as if it had followed Dorothy. A close friend asked us shortly after if our cat had returned. We told him no. and he asked us a question that we found very strange, especially since we hadn't told anyone. He asked if our cat had ever spoken to us. My wife took a while to respond, but finally she told him what had happened, and he replied with something that still hurts us. He said that when a cat speaks, it must leave because it has broken a necessary rule for them to be with us. He said that Dorothy had to go even though he loved us. My wife, with tears in her eyes, said she knew that Dorothy had died, that he had come to say goodbye, that she knew he couldn't stay because what was in the house was stronger than him, that he was suffering every day he stayed with us. But Dorothy resisted because he simply loved us too much, loved her too much, because that connection between them was very strong, and a simple, "I love you," unleashed everything, brought things into the house that we will never even begin to understand. I know it's very unbelievable, but I share this story because the doubt still lingers. I hope the community can give me their opinion on this matter. And lastly, to tell you to take care of your pets because sometimes they protect us from things we can't see and love us beyond what we can comprehend. Thank you for listening to my story. I send a big greeting and a hug to the entire community. My name is Zuriel. I am originally from a community in the state of Tlaxcala. I have been following you almost since the beginning of the channel, but I had never dared to share the things that have happened to me. I feel that no one will believe me. The few who have heard it think I'm crazy most of the time when I tell this. However, I am encouraged to tell this because I recently heard a couple of stories about animals behaving strangely, so I decided to share my story with you. You see, I can't tell you that I have any special gift. I'm not psychic or a medium or anything like that, as in several stories from people in the community. But I could say that my case is somewhat different. The strangest things that have happened to me haven't happened just to me. They always happen to both of us, my sister and me. I suppose that being twins, we are very close, and she, like me, was a big fan of yours. She dreamed of sending you her stories. In fact, I came to Stories in the Night thanks to her. As I told you, almost a year ago I worked as a security guard in a canning factory in an industrial area near my town. Inside the factory, the work environment was very good as long as there were people working. But when the staff wasn't there, things changed drastically. Inside the factory, during the security rounds, you could feel extremely heavy vibes. A couple of times while I was walking inside the factory on a weekend night, I could hear as if someone was walking around the canning machines. The footsteps on them were very evident, as clear as if an employee was there walking, just as if there were people working. On one occasion, I was doing my rounds again in the early morning when no one was there, and I heard someone speak right behind me, as if it were close to my ear. I could even feel a kind of breath caressing my ear, but I finished my round, fear and all, because it was my job. That same night, later, perhaps at 2 in the morning, I was inside the guardhouse with another colleague. We were both taking turns sleeping. We woke up immediately. We were between asleep and awake, and a few seconds later we heard someone knocking on the window again. We both got up and looked out to see who it was, but there was no one. We approached the monitor to check the recordings from the outside camera. At no time during the night did anyone else come near. I'm telling you this just so you know the kind of atmosphere there was in the place, because the following is the real reason for this story. Outside the guardhouse, on the sidewalks of the corridor, many stray dogs approached looking for food. The poor things. There were 2, maybe 3, to whom we gave leftovers from our food from time to time. But one afternoon they stopped appearing. Those little dogs we already knew didn't return. In their place, a very large Dalmatian dog began to roam the area. He was very malnourished and apparently dehydrated. We started to feed him. We didn't pay attention to a detail that now seems very strange to me. We never heard that dog bark. I liked the idea of taking him home and adopting him to guard my house. There I already had a little dog named Luna, a mix of Labrador and Husky, with almost white blue eyes. I can assure you that her gaze is very tender and innocent, and I liked the idea of bringing a friend for my little dog, Luna, so that they could both get along. So I made the decision to take him home, and as soon as I entered my house with him, I thought my little dog would bark at him, would get agitated, or would make some kind of fuss, if you know what I mean. However, the opposite happened. Upon seeing him, my little dog turned around and hurried into the house, crying as if very scared. Of course, it seemed strange to me, but I didn't give it too much importance. The Dalmatian was very tall, at least for normal dog standards. He wasn't supernatural or anything like that, but of course he was a dog that impressed others. The days passed, and something I had noticed was that the Dalmatian, on several occasions, tried to enter the house. He tried to open the door. My little dog was always inside. She was raised to sleep with us and be clean. But on the other hand, letting an adult dog that I had brought just a few days ago into my house, I didn't think it was the most convenient, at least not at that moment. For several nights when I had time off, I could hear strange noises outside, like footsteps, as if someone was walking around the house. But since the dog was outside and didn't bark, I thought I was imagining things, that it was just fatigue, nothing more. It stayed like that for a few days until one night we went to bed and began to doze off. A while later, an hour at most, I began to clearly hear that someone was trying to open the door. They were noises that mixed into my dream, and I attributed it to the fact that I was dreaming, so I didn't try to get up. But suddenly I clearly heard that the door opened and someone spoke inside my house. Finally, I could enter. The voice was strong, deep, strange. It wasn't the voice of a man, and I mean it didn't sound human. However, I got up, took a machete that I had under my bed, and with it in my hand, I went out to see what had happened. The first thing I thought, of course, was that someone had broken into my house to rob. My wife got up and silently dialed the emergency number to send a patrol. I went out very carefully, not to make noise, but upon opening the door, my little dog quickly entered the room, crying with her tail between her legs. It was more than evident that something out there had terrified her, so I immediately thought that indeed someone had broken in, that there was a thief. I walked slowly, very cautiously. While it was true that I had gone out with the machete to see what was happening, I was also afraid that someone was there, possibly armed. But my fright turned to surprise, to disbelief. And in the living room was the Dalmatian, looking towards where I was lying on the couch. I could see in the shadow of the night the shine of that dog's eyes, which was there without flinching, just staring at me. Those eyes, that shine little by little, stopped resembling the gaze of an animal. It was becoming human. I had the feeling that what was watching me back was not an animal, at least not entirely. But perhaps that was the fear of what was happening at that moment. I wanted to think that it was my paranoia, but even so, the biggest doubt assailed me. How had the animal gotten into my house during the night if I had made sure to lock the doors before sleeping? And every night before going to rest, I had the habit of locking the doors just in case, to feel a little safer in a world where you can no longer trust, at least not like before. I lowered the machete and approached the animal on the couch. I took him by the collar to take him out, but something didn't feel right. There was something very strange. A few minutes later, the patrol arrived at our home, and I went out to talk to the police. I told them that I had heard someone trying to break into my house, so they checked inside, the yard, and the surroundings. They found nothing, but a policewoman, the one who entered to inspect my house with her partner, mentioned something that unsettled me even more. She told me that the animal I had tied up in the back had scared her, because when she turned her back, she had heard as if it laughed softly at her. Amid nervous laughter, she left my house, not without first suggesting that I get rid of that one, which had a very strange appearance. The next day, I told my sister about it. She recommended that I be more careful with that animal, that I observe well what it did, because at some point it could become dangerous. Even though she hadn't seen the dog, she told me that something didn't feel right. There was something very strange in everything I had told her, but it remained a simple conversation and nothing more. But what happened that night still lingered in my head, especially with that comment from the policewoman. A couple of days passed, but since what happened that night, I felt that the animal should be tied up, at least to give me a slight feeling of comfort in its presence. I don't like at all having little dogs locked up, much less tied up. But I reiterate, at that moment, I felt it was the right decision for him. A few days later, already past midnight, I went out to feed the dog. I put his bowl of food beside him so he could eat and turned around to go back inside. After taking a few steps, I heard again that voice I had heard days before, that deep voice, that grave and inhuman voice. "Hey, sir, why don't you let me in so we can have dinner?" I turned around to see who it was who was talking to me. The supposed Dalmatian was standing on his two hind legs, upright like a person, with a completely terrifying look, as if his eyes were now completely human, and with an enormous, very big smile that made it very clear to me that what I had brought to my house was not a dog. He laughed upon seeing me standing in front of him, and for a moment I was lost in the shock of the moment, to a couple of seconds later, enter my house screaming, with my voice completely altered, so that my wife would call my sister as soon as possible since she lived a few houses away from us. The creature out there was heard, and it began to laugh in a way that I can't even describe in the slightest. It was a demonic laugh, a laugh from hell, which continued while it easily removed the chain with which I had tied it, as if it were a thread. It broke it and ran frantically towards the darkest part of the yard, then jumped over the fence and disappeared into the night. Up to this moment, I haven't known anything like it around here. The few people I've told this to haven't mocked me, but it's evident they don't believe me. And the one who did believe me, my sister today, is no longer with me. It's been a few months since she passed away. Community, please keep something very important in mind, especially those who haven't yet had their paranormal encounter. You don't have to be afraid of the dark. You have to fear what is in it. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story. Good night.